freezing, blinding, disorienting.
It had those ingredients that intensified to a dangerous storm.
When blizzards strike,
I've never seen that much snow before.
they can have deadly consequences.
We ended up with 3 storms in one.
Nature was against us.
Yet in some places in the world, extreme winter conditions not only provide a safe haven for life,
Winter weather is very important to the ecosystems.
they help protect the planet.
Arctic sea ice is so important because it helps to moderate the global climate.
And as our climate changes, we may lose far more than we expect. Hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes.
This was the deadliest tornado on record.
The impact can be devastating.
God completely wiped it off the map.
We step inside the disaster
We were running for our lives.
It was just like a freight train.
and unravel the unexpected and sometimes jaw-dropping total impact.
Believe it or not, some good can come from these monster storms.
After crossing the U.S., Winter Storm Jacob heads northward from the eastern seaboard towards Atlantic Canada. When it meets the frigid North Atlantic air, it will become a giant, a historic weather phenomenon with devastating and lasting impacts. For locals of St. John's, Newfoundland, the call for a snowstorm is a regular part of the winter forecast and nothing to worry about.
For us as Newfoundlanders, someone says there's a snowstorm, that's like Wednesday. It doesn't matter.
And we are in the middle of the Atlantic. This is a normal occurrence for us.
St. John's, Newfoundland is a small city on the east coast of Canada. Settled in the 1600s, it's home to colorful row houses, historic sites, and surrounded by nature, whale watching, and icebergs.
Well, we live here just outside St. John's. It's a beautiful area, it's quiet, it's relaxing, lots of nature, and we enjoy it.
Its position along what's known as Iceberg Alley also means the area can expect lots of snow and wind. But for experts monitoring the approaching weather front, they can see the signs of a monster storm.
This storm deepened very rapidly as it moved off the U.S. eastern seaboard and really tapped into that temperature difference between the continent and the ocean. And in that environment with that strong temperature difference, it had those ingredients that it needed to really rapidly intensify into a dangerous storm.
But for many residents, they've heard this news before.
They were giving this storm a lot of hype. But then again, weather prediction is not 100%. I mean, we've had forecasts before where, you know, we were forecasted for a lot of snow and we got nothing.
We kind of figured that it was going to be big, but we didn't realize how big it really was, how big it could get.
For Shondell and Kyle Snow, the impending storm is the last thing on their minds.
We found out we were expecting 4 weeks pregnant. We were pretty stoked about it right from the start.
With their first child due in less than 2 weeks, Shondell begins her maternity leave the day before the storm is expected to arrive.
As I was like finishing up at work, everyone's like, you better not have the baby in that storm they're calling for. Like, you better, you know, watch out for it. We both said kind of like, it'd be a little adventure. Kyle was born in a snowstorm in January, and so it seemed like it would be fitting.
As the first snowflakes begin to fall, the majority of St. John's residents have no idea what Mother Nature has in store.
We could see that the accumulation was getting heavier. The winds were starting to pick up. Approximately 4 o'clock that evening was when we were into the heaviest of it.
Everybody was on edge and knowing that there's something coming, right?
As the storm approaches, Shondell wakes up suddenly in the middle of the night.
So I'd had contractions, but Kyle went on to sleep, and I was thinking like, I just didn't think it was actually going to happen yet. And so I was kind of like, I'm having some contractions, but I'm going to try to go to sleep. And then all of a sudden I was like, my bladder broke.
As they rush to the hospital, the snow begins to fall. They just have to hope they can make it before the snow turns into a blizzard.
It can become very quick with those type of snowfall amounts, and with those winds, it'd be very, very easy to become disoriented and lost if you're just looking at the driving conditions just being really just quite treacherous.
Seeing the conditions for a perfect storm coming, weather experts are on high alert.
So this was a case of one of these storms that really rapidly intensified into a very powerful storm as it moved south of Nova Scotia. It brought very significant snowfall, very, very strong northerly winds, and storm surge as well.
If this storm is anything like the blizzard that hit St. John's in 1959, it could be catastrophic.
The date's February 15th, 16th, 1959. A powerful blizzard brought 7-meter high snow drifts to the St. John's area and put about 70,000 people without power for a period during the peak.
With winds reaching up to 220 kilometers an hour, the storm dumped 55 centimeters of snow on the city. In the dead of the night, residents of the Battery, a steeply hilled neighborhood, described a sound louder than a clap of thunder. An avalanche had struck 2 houses, sweeping them downhill and killing 5 people. The survivors spent 12 terrifying hours buried alive until they could be dug out. 61 years later, an eerily similar storm threatens the area. Kyle and Shondell arrive at the hospital just as the storm slams into St. John's.
Usually when pregnant women go to the hospital and they're having like a contraction, they send them home and then say when it gets worse or something happens, come back. Well, they weren't allowed to leave because it was a state of emergency. So you had pregnant women everywhere, and their families and their partners and their parents. And so it was either people sleeping on the floors, there was people sleeping in chairs, it was like very overcrowded, so.
While Kyle and Shondell are at the hospital, the Walls hunker down at home. But as the snow falls, their 26-year-old son, Joshua, has no interest in staying cooped up inside.
Josh was right from day one. He was a handful. He had to be the center of attention. He didn't want to stand out too much, but he wanted to be known. He was very outgoing, very lovable, very friendly, sociable.
Joshua had friends from all walks of life because he was raised. You don't judge, book from its cover. You love everybody.
But for Joshua, the severe weather reports create an overwhelming sense of stress.
He did suffer with anxiety, and that did play on him quite a bit. Very rarely would he let it show, but you could tell inside that he was struggling. Over the last few years, he has lost a lot of close friends, had passed away. All with the anxiety involved, it just kind of amplified his feelings, and he struggled dealing with it.
And knowing that the snowstorm was coming, he felt claustrophobic. He said, I'm 26 years old, Mom. He said, you can't protect me and hover over me forever. You can't keep me from going anywhere. And I said, yes, buddy, yes, I know. And he hugged me. And then he had me believe that he wasn't going nowhere.
Outside, the storm is dropping snow on Newfoundland at a record-breaking rate.
Some of the snowfall rates were 3 to 4 centimeters an hour. And during the peak time, got 10 centimeters an hour. That's a very significant shot of snow for that area in a short time.
As 911 calls pour in, emergency responders venture into the storm.
Chimneys blown over, power lines blowing off poles, pole fires, alarm bells malfunctioning, systems. Anything you could have got thrown at you was thrown at us that day.
Even in the light of day, the visibility reaches zero.
When I was actually responding to calls, other than the trucks in front of me with lights on, I absolutely had no vision.
authorities urge the public to stay indoors.
The main hazard that you would have with a blizzard would be the very, very poor visibilities that can be down at zero at times with those strong winds and the heavy snow. And with that, it can be very easy to become disoriented and very easy to become lost.
But for Joshua, the prospect of staying home is too much to bear. Nora is beside herself when she realizes her son is missing.
She said, Wayne, he's gone. Nora did everything but sit on him to keep him here.
We never seen him slip past. I couldn't tell you if he went through the front door. I couldn't tell you if he went through the side door.
There was no footprints anywhere to be seen.
There was nowhere to go. Like, there was nowhere to... We started to panic.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
As the storm intensifies, the Walls face the terrifying reality that their son is now out in the blizzard. As a raging blizzard puts the city of St. John's, Newfoundland on lockdown, Wayne and Nora Wall are beside themselves when they realize their 26-year-old son Joshua has disappeared into the storm.
Real panic set in. Myself and my wife, we got dressed, we went through the door, we went up the road, and we got about 150 feet away from the house, and we were in complete whiteout conditions. We couldn't go anywhere, we couldn't see nothing. We almost got lost literally 150 feet away from the house. There was no footprints anywhere to be seen. Our footprints were getting covered in just as quick as we were stepping at them. I've never seen that much snow before. I really haven't. Literally, you couldn't see anything.
Blizzards are usually associated with very intense low-pressure systems, so a lot of times we'll need a very, very heavy snowfall as well as very strong winds. And then that will produce those very poor to near-zero visibilities, either in the falling snow or blowing snow or a combination of the two. Even if you did step outside your house, it'd be pretty quick to become quite disoriented and not see even where your house is, just over a short distance.
Forced to return home, the Walls are desperate to locate their missing son.
And when I called them, it went right to voicemail. I called again a few more times, and each time I went to voicemail. I sent them a text message. I got no responses on the text messages. Then I sent them a Facebook message. And I could tell by the indication that the Facebook message didn't deliver. So I got, then I got worried. I called the police, and I had told them that he had gone out into the storm. We can't reach him. I have no idea where he's to. I told him that I am worried because, you know, his anxiety is on bust.
Emergency calls soon overwhelm first responders.
People were getting snowbound, trapped in cars. We had some calls where people actually couldn't get their doors or their homes closed, looking for us to help them out in those situations.
The danger of the storm is made worse by sweeping power outages.
There are reported 35 power outages affecting just under 14,000 customers at different parts of the province.
Without backup generators, many resort to using fireplaces, gas stoves, and propane to stay warm.
So everybody was augmenting their system by propane inserts and wood stoves, and that was a big concern to us with carbon monoxide poisoning with the wood stoves and this. So anytime we get a call for alarm activation, we just thought the worst and hoping for the best. The general public didn't expect us to show up. It was that bad that they did not think, even if they called 911, that somebody would respond. And when we come to the door and the snow would be 8 feet over the roof, and we'd have to tunnel into the door to get to the person, when they looked at us, you could see the delight in their eyes that at least somebody showed up. We challenge ourselves every single day to get to a call as quick as we possibly can. When the storm really hit, it took us to a call that we would have been there in 6 minutes. It took us 45 minutes to get there.
By the afternoon, Shondell has been in labor for over 12 hours. Kyle's concern grows as he watches the blizzard outside.
In like the procedure room or the birthing room or whatever, there was huge windows, but it was just white. It's just pure white. It was the worst storm I've ever been in by far.
Kyle would every now and again be like, look outside. And I'd be like, holy. And then I'd be like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, okay. And then I would just go back to it. I just remember looking outside and not being able to see anything at all.
Kyle realizes he may have more than his wife and baby to be anxious about.
And so I decided to go downstairs and check on the weather. When I approached the front doors of the hospital, you could just hear the wind howling just through the entire building. And when I got to the hospital door and opened it up, I mean, it was half buried. The snow drifts are reaching up the walls of the hospital. It was eerie in every way. There's nobody around. Like it was like a ghost town. It was creepy almost.
While Kyle and Shondell focus on the imminent birth of their first child, the walls hold on to hope that their son has found shelter from the storm.
We held out high hopes that he was caught in a cabin somewhere and couldn't get out.
Without shelter, the chances of surviving the storm are slim. In zero visibility conditions, many become disoriented, and as hypothermia sets in, body temperatures can drop lethally.
If one were to become disoriented or lost at that point when you're out with those very strong winds, temperatures are at the very least usually around freezing, if below, possibly getting down even colder. Being out in those conditions, hypothermia becomes a very big problem.
For first responders, the snow buildup and zero visibility make the roads nearly impassable.
The crews were getting snowbound, trucks couldn't move. We had to put snowplows in front of every station. Every pumper crew that moved, we had a snowplow in front of that pumper, clearing way to get us to the emergency. So,
with the roads blocked, the police can't reach the walls to search for Joshua. Wayne frantically thinks of other ways to locate his son.
I had realized that his phone was actually in my name, so I went back through the phone records just to see the last number in which he texted. I called that number. A young guy answered the phone and I asked if Josh was there. He said Josh was gonna come by, but he said he didn't show up. So I said, well, what were in the text messages? And one of the text messages indicated that he had sent a ping location to where he was to, and that he was lost.
Some panic has set in.
As a monster blizzard buries St. John's, Newfoundland, Kyle and Shondell finally welcome their firstborn child into the world.
So I was in labor for quite some time.
21 hours.
21 hours. Levi was born at 10:41 p.m. in the height of the storm. I think the record was broken around the same time as when Levi was actually brought into the world.
Some parts of the city are buried under 93 centimeters of snow. The storm is what weather experts call a snow bomb.
Bombogenesis, it's kind of a term that's been more or less used amongst meteorologists, but it has gained a bit of steam out. Basically, a bombogenesis or a bomb cyclone is just a very rapidly intensifying storm.
As storms intensify, they expel more air than they ingest. That evacuation of air causes air pressure to drop. The lower the air pressure reading, the stronger the storm. The rate at which the air pressure falls is an indicator of how quickly the storm is intensifying. For a system to qualify as a bomb, its air pressure must plummet, decreasing by at least 24 millibars, the unit used to measure atmospheric pressure, in 24 hours. In addition to the dramatic drop in air pressure, strong winds create hurricane conditions.
The peak wind gusts with this system right across eastern Newfoundland range from around 100 kilometers an hour up to about 170 kilometers an hour. On that higher range, you're starting to get into Category 2 hurricane force wind gusts.
The winds did take a toll on the communication systems, electrical systems, siding blowing off houses. We did have a large roof blow off one of the commercial structures in the area, which did land on some of the houses. You get a lot of structural damage from the winds blowing materials off homes.
As the worst of the storm finally subsides, the search for Joshua begins.
I got up and I took off up through the backwoods. Snow in places was up to my waist. I didn't try to shovel myself out of it, just trying to make my way down the path just to see if he had taken shelter somewhere. I made it about 1 kilometer down the path. It took me 2 hours to do that, and I was starting to get dehydrated. The shovel that I had broken, so the only thing that I could do was try and come back to the path that I had made. By the time I got back towards the house, I was met with search and rescue, and they pretty much took over from there.
We had the helicopters, we had the police dog, we had everything. And they couldn't even pick up on infrared because the snow was so deep. To contend with that kind of snow, we felt so helpless. Nature was against us.
While the search for Joshua goes on, with the city under a state of emergency, the military is called in to help. With a new baby in their arms, Shondell and Kyle find themselves trapped in the hospital.
We weren't allowed to leave the hospital without having somewhere to go and without being able to get there safely. And we had no idea what our house was like. We had no idea how much snow was there. So I put a post out on Facebook, actually, and just said, hey, does anyone live in this general area? Can you get some pictures? The door to the front of the house was buried. There was 6, 7, 8 feet of snow in front of the house.
While the Snows try to figure out how to get home, record-breaking amounts of snow make the search for Joshua difficult.
Tuesday evening rolled around and they had told us that the search was suspended. There was just too much snow and the terrain was very hard. These search and rescue guys would come out of the woods and they would be extremely tired. They suspended it until we had a significant melt. When they left, myself and some of my close family members, we kind of just picked up where they left off. We asked for volunteers, and we were met with an overwhelming amount of help.
7 days after Joshua's disappearance, a volunteer makes a devastating discovery.
It was a little after 10 o'clock when my daughter came running to me with the phone in her hand. When I answered the phone, he was a firefighter from Avondale, and he said, I think I found him. I took off towards the marsh. And when I got up there, I got off Skidoo, and he looked at me. He said, just wait. I said, is it him? He said, just wait. He said, don't quit. And just looking at his face, listening to him talk, I mean, I knew what I was headed for. He was about 20 feet inside the tree line. That's where we found
him. The next day, reality sinks in for Wayne and Nora.
When we got up, we looked at each other and was like, there's no search today. There's no search today. He's not coming home. It was hard to come to terms with that, and sometimes there are days that I still think it's a bad dream. I'm still expecting myself just to wake up and say, what the hell was that? But it's not going to happen.
There's no words to describe the loss. They say it'll get easier with time. I just don't see it happen. Whenever it snows, I'm a mess. I used to love the snow, you know? He went from being an earth angel, that's what I called him, to a snow angel.
As the Walls mourn the loss of their son, Kyle and Shondell head home with their newborn to a house that's been buried by the blizzard.
Somebody said, let us know when you're going and we'll help you shovel out. And then I think it was 12 or 15 people from the community came down with shovels in hand and they helped dig us out.
It was very overwhelming. It's terrifying enough to bring home a newborn, but to bring a newborn home in all of that, it was a scary time for sure for us.
Through a harrowing ordeal, the community finds strength and bonds over their shared experience.
I think Newfoundlanders are versatile, they're used to adverse conditions. We have expertise that is far-reaching.
It put a whole other layer on becoming like first-time parents. We learned that we can get through just about anything. We have a silver lining from it all because we have Levi, but we definitely, there was something about Snowmageddon that there was this really positive feeling that came from it between people coming to help. And after that, the little Levi went viral, Newfoundland viral. So there was a feeling of positivity in all the madness for sure.
The thing that I think really hit me the most is that they had a smile on their face. As bad as it was, for some reason, people are more jovial and friendly to one another, right? And I think it's just the nature of Newfoundlander. I don't think there's anything the Lord above or Mother Nature can throw at us that we won't embrace somewhere along the line.
While extreme winter weather is a fight for survival for some, others thrive in extreme cold weather. Blinding blizzards, hurricane winds, deadly roads. Around the world, the cold in winter is often dreaded and feared. Freezing rain can encase houses, and blowing snow can down power lines. If you survive the battering trauma of an avalanche, suffocation usually happens within 15 minutes. And if you're caught in the cold, hypothermia can set in even faster. The cold kills 20 times as many people as hot weather. And northern Canada is no stranger to extreme cold.
Winter in the Yukon, it's really one of our longest seasons. It can last 5 months and it can be dangerously cold at points in time. So in fact, some of the coldest temperatures recorded in North America have been from around the southern Yukon. 1947, they recorded a temperature of minus 62.5 degrees Celsius, which is pretty cold.
Yet for some, the perilous climate is simply a way of life.
Our people have been living in the far northwest Canada for thousands and thousands of years. Winter is not something to be feared, but rather something that our people have absolutely mastered. Overland travel can be easier in winter. Animal tracks are easily spotted and followed. Sound travels differently in the cold, making it easier to track animals. A fish net is set easily under the ice. Food harvested in the winter can be easily stored by freezing it.
The people's reliance on cold winter conditions is shared with the animals that live here.
Winter weather is actually very important to the ecosystems. We'll get these very big snowstorm events that are coupled with these extreme high wind events. And what will happen is all the snow that falls during the storm will be blown over to the north sides of the mountains, and these huge wind drifts will turn into ice patches. These snow drifts dot the landscape. There's hundreds of them in the southern Yukon.
In the winter months, animals like pika, lemmings, and grouse use the snowdrifts for shelter. The extreme winter conditions also shape the critical summer habitats of caribou and Dall's sheep.
In the summer, when caribou and sheep move up to their summer ranges, they'll stand on these snowdrifts to get away from these parasitic insects. So the area where the snow patches exist completely overlaps with the critical summer and fall habitat of caribou and sheep.
But global warming poses a significant threat to the environment, wildlife, and people of the North.
With increasingly longer and warmer summers, there's been this progressive melt of this permanent ice that on some mountains has been around for close to 10,000 years. When an ecosystem has formed around the development of permanent ice, then the animals in that habitat and the plants in that habitat have adapted to that ecological condition. So when you start to see these ice patches getting smaller and smaller and perennial snow not lasting in the environment as long as it used to, then it creates this situation of uncertainty.
While a threat to those who live here, the retreating ice and thawing permafrost also reveals treasures preserved by the icy conditions.
There was a baby mammoth mummy that was found in Siberia where they are able to completely sequence 70% of the DNA that came out of that mammoth. Here in the Yukon, we have one horse bone that is about 750,000 years old, where we were able to sequence the DNA out of one bone that had been preserved in ice for almost 1 million years.
In the Yukon, glacial evidence shows that caribou and sheep have been using the snowdrifts for millennia.
While we were surveying this ice patch, we did find this hunting blind right there. So we got evidence of people setting up hunting in caribou habitat near ice patches designed to hide out from these very, very curious caribou who are going to come up and say hello to us.
Well, normal archaeology involves a lot of pretty heavy labor, but glacial archaeology is a little bit different. You basically just go up into the mountains and you walk around at the face of melting ice and pick up the artifacts that you find.
We found this section of a throwing dart sitting in the dung in this little meltwater channel. So I'm just gonna slowly pick this up and see what it looks like out of the dung.
These archaeological artifacts expose an intertwining of culture and nature that has survived for thousands of years.
This is a copper-tipped wooden foreshaft that's just melted out of the ice.
All the artifacts related to this very ancient hunting tradition are now falling out of the ice, but what's really interesting is we see this evidence of a very, very consistent and stable First Nation land use.
For the Champagne and Asiac First Nations, these artifacts link them to their long history.
This connection teaches us so much about who we are, where we come from. These findings also help our young people to be aware of their responsibility to take care of these lands so that it can really take care of us.
But as climate change continues, the fragile balance of the North is threatened.
The ecological conditions and the animal use has been stable for a very, very long time, and people have been basically engaging in a very, very long-standing tradition. And how this interacts with climate change is that when you see climatic conditions and ecological conditions change so rapidly, you have to wonder if we will be able to use these mountains consistently in the future.
Well, the future of Arctic cultures and animals depends on ferocious winter storms to sustain life. It is the existence of ice that stands between disaster, death, and surprising beauty. Hard, frigid, unforgiving. Ice ages have obliterated life on Earth since the beginning of time. But for the past 13 to 14 million years, ice cover in the North and South poles have moderated the Earth's temperature to allow life to flourish and grow. Despite its fickle and fearsome existence, ice is an ample source of intrigue for its incredible physical properties and mysterious beauty.
I'm always amazed at the diversity and beauty of the ice environment around our planet. It's amazing to look out and see icebergs that make it look like a cityscape. It's marvelous that our planet is able to create these kinds of cold region phenomenon, and people enjoy them for the beauty of them.
Icebergs are shimmering behemoths with awe-inspiring colors and beauty.
You can see blue colors and clear colors and dark colors, and that all has to do with the impurities that are in the ice. So if there's very small impurities and not very many of them, you'll get a preferential scattering of light from them, which can cause these green colors or blue colors that you see from them. If they're very, very transparent, there's very few impurities in it. It looks like the light is just penetrating right through it.
Just like rocks, the color of ice can also carry valuable information about the Earth's climate.
You can get carbon pollution from around the world that is delivered to the Arctic as part of this oceanic and atmospheric circulation that goes on, and that can be deposited on the surface of glaciers and sea ice as black carbon, which also makes the ice look dark.
Behind each iceberg that traverses the world's oceans is the story of a violent and terrifying rupture from a glacier. Although glaciers appear monolithic and immovable, there is a vast network of a glacial phenomenon called ice streams lurking below the surface.
When you think about glaciers on land, one of the things that is not that evident to the public is that these masses of ice are in motion. They move to such an extent that we have an analog of what you would think of as a river inside a glacier. And so these are called ice streams. It's bounded on either side by ice that's moving very slowly or not at all, but inside the ice stream itself, it's moving very rapidly.
On average, glaciers move 25 centimeters per day, but it's possible for them to shift up to 30 meters.
What is causing it to move is that when you get meltwater on the surface of a glacier, you get something called a moulin. And a moulin is basically a hole in the glacier where fresh water can penetrate down to the base of the glacier. So you can imagine water going down several kilometers to the bedrock that's underneath. And then that water is under high pressure under there, and it's quite warm, so it stays in liquid phase, and it forms kind of a lubricant between the base of the ice and the bedrock below, and that causes the glaciers to slip much more effectively, therefore delivering more icebergs to the ocean.
Much like icebergs, whose mass is hidden underwater, other beautiful ice formations are created under the surface.
You can get things like brine icicles. When the brine is forming in the sea ice, it actually follows a branched structure very similar to a tree.
When sea ice freezes in the Arctic and Antarctic, the salt in the water separates from the water crystals to create a thick brine. This brine cracks the sea ice and seeps into the water below. It's so cold, the water around it freezes, forming a falling finger of ice. Brinicles can travel all the way to the ocean floor, instantly freezing every sea creature in their path, leaving a remarkable, deadly ice column suspended in water. But there can be a delicate, natural beauty to briny ice as well.
A similar kind of phenomenon happens over sea ice, and those are called frost flowers. And so in a frost flower, you sublimate the surface, which means you go from this solid phase up to a vapor phase, and then the vapor phase freezes, forming a very delicate flower on the surface of the ice. We call these salt flowers or frost flowers.
In the Arctic, air is so dry that as spring temperatures increase, the ice surface can go from a solid state to a vapor state, completely bypassing the liquid phase. The result, the flowers flourish, forming ethereal ice meadows. As these flowers grow, they capture salt and marine bacteria, creating an excellent home for microbes. And while these beautiful frost flowers are home to a rich bioculture, they also release atmospheric aerosol, which may be involved with the depletion of ozone in the lower atmosphere.
These things are very reactive with the climate. They form very complex chemical reactions that are related to the ozone layer of our planet. And so how the ozone layer is maintained and protects us from ultraviolet radiation is connected to these very brine-rich forms of frost flowers on the ice surface.
Ice and snow can be both beautiful and deadly. But it also anchors the Earth's climate and keeps our existence on this planet from utter devastation. Blizzards, snow, ice. While the extreme cold can be deadly, living without it could be far worse. As global warming increases, it's affecting the North at an unprecedented rate, a process that is accelerating climate change and unpredictable and severe weather around the world. Dustin is a physical scientist and studies firsthand the effects of a changing climate in the North.
Arctic sea ice is so important because it helps to moderate and cool the polar regions. It helps to moderate the global climate. The ice acts as a reflector, and it's able to reflect up to 80% of the sun's energy. If that ice were to go away, this energy becomes absorbed into the ocean, which can increase the ocean temperature and the global climate. So right now, in the winter, the Beaufort Sea, much of the Arctic is frozen solid. And throughout the season, as we get into June and July, the ice melts and goes away. But now we're seeing this happen earlier and earlier and earlier. So the breakup of ice actually today happens 10 days earlier than it did 20 years ago.
The result is a warming of the oceans, which in turn can affect weather patterns globally, changing when, where, and how severe cyclones occur around the world.
It is well known that in the Arctic, the loss of sea ice causes more coastal storms, and the rapid loss of sea ice over time has increased more storms over time. And that's why we're seeing more erosion now along the Arctic coastline than we've ever seen before.
Arctic coastlines around the world are eroding between 1 and 1.5 meters a year.
The most surprising discovery when analyzing the coast and looking at coastal erosion, it really has to be how fast it happens. How just one storm can cause so much damage. We can see huge blocks fall, the sizes of small houses. In the community of Tuk, we see, over 2 meters of erosion from just one storm.
In the tiny community of Tuktoyaktuk, erosion is drastically changing the lives of residents.
We see the loss of buildings, we see the loss of infrastructure, roads, and people's homes. The town has been forced to move several homes. The RCMP detachment was relocated, as well as the school. It's the loss of communities. It's the loss of habitat, important species habitat, like from the polar bear.
As rising temperatures melt sea ice, permafrost is also disappearing at an alarming rate.
Permafrost is ground that has been permanently frozen for 2 years or more. It encompasses almost 25% of the landmass in the Northern Hemisphere.
Some 1,400 gigatons of carbon are estimated to be locked away in the permafrost. As permafrost melts, carbon is being released, adding to the effect on climate change.
The loss of Arctic permafrost has greatly impacted wildlife as well by reducing the amount of habitat along the coast, but also by changing the nearshore ecosystem with the increased amount of sediment that is now being eroded into the water column.
On the uninhabited Pelly Island in the Beaufort Sea, the fastest rate of coastal erosion in the world is ripping away the land at an extraordinary rate.
The erosion on Pelly Island can be double to triple the erosion rates that we're seeing in other areas. Why Pelly Island is eroding so much faster than the surrounding area is, one, because of its location. It's located right at the impact zone of the strong Beaufort Sea waves. to its size, it is fronted by a very large 30-meter cliff of ice-rich sand, clay, and silt. So as the waves undercut the island, 15 years ago, we would see rates of 10 to 15 meters a year. Now we're seeing rates of 30 to 40 meters a year. And the reason why it's doubled is directly related to climate change. In 50 years, I suspect that much of the coast as we see today will look quite different. Probably islands like Pele or Tuktoyaktuk Island may be gone.
Scientists predict the effects will soon creep southward.
What's happening in the Arctic will eventually happen in other spots, as the ice that exists there now may not exist there in the future.
As the total impact of the loss of our extreme cold in the north is set to be felt around the globe, storms like the blizzard in St. John's, Newfoundland will continue to increase, both in frequency and ferocity. The future of the North is intertwined with the survival of life on this planet. What affects the Arctic weather reverberates around the world, with more devastating blizzards, snow, and ice. And to ignore the marching drums of time is to hasten an unknown future.